Well, it's a weekend and it's becoming part of our tradition now almost to speak with David Ashford, the Minister for Health and Social Care. But as in previous weeks, David, I'd like to expand it out because we got some questions actually about what happened on Friday in Tynwald. It was quite interesting, I think, to a lot of people. The emergency powers, you withdrew yours. Should we start with that actually? Can you explain what you put forward and why it got withdrawn first of all?
So what I was putting forward initially was to combine up some of the regulations. So the prohibition on movement regulations, the events and gatherings regulations, combining them all up. Because one of the things we need to do now as we move towards the end of the emergency phase is to start building the regulations into such a format that if we need to bring them forward as continuance regulations, so continuing for a period past the emergency period, they're actually in a format that can be done. One of the things I did was I presented to members on the regulations on Thursday. I took on board some of the feedback that came back from members, and in light of the feedback and some of the very helpful suggestions made, I decided to pull the regulations so we can rewrite them, reconsider them, and incorporate some of the things that members suggested.
Some might say you pulled it because you wouldn't get the votes.
Well, no, I like to think as Minister I do actually listen. I've been a backbencher myself. I was quite an irritable backbencher, I think, probably for a few of my ministerial colleagues in those days. But I think when people have valid points, then rather than just blindly going on, we should actually stop, consider and change where necessary. So a new set of regulations will be coming before Tynwald.
Okay, well, you withdrew yours. Dr. Alex Allison actually failed on his attempt with a bit of education bill under the emergency powers. Coughing, I think, particularly was the one that got picked up. It was going to be made under these potential new laws an illegal thing that happened at school. Can you just flush that one out for us? What exactly?
Well, I'm afraid that's where I did disagree with some of my Tynwald colleagues in terms of their interpretation of that. So contained within the regulations that Dr. Allison was moving was to make it an offence of coughing and spitting within the school environment, because obviously, as we know with COVID-19, one of the quickest ways for it to spread is via aerosol generation. Via bodily fluids, etc. So it was important to have that provision in. But one of the key things about that provision is the way it was worded, where it says coughing, spitting at the person. So it wasn't around just saying coughing and spitting, where someone's in a classroom, they cough and they're going to get prosecuted, as seemed to be being portrayed by some. It was quite clear, as far as I was concerned, in the regulations, what it actually meant. It basically that if you had a pupil or someone who was either spitting at another pupil deliberately or at a member of staff, then obviously that was an offence. And I think it's important we do have things like that. There's actually, as Dr. Allison pointed out in his reply, there's other things such as that in the Education Act anyway. This was just making it clear in relation to the coughing and spitting side of it.
Well, the whole thing failed, and it was interesting because it was down to the bishop's vote, which is quite unusual and quite, contentious.
It is.
For some people.
It's very rare if you go back in Tynwald history where the bishop's vote has made a difference. But as you rightly point out, Paul, in this instance, the bishop's vote actually swung it in Ledgeco. It's one of those rare historical occasions where it's had that impact.
Okay, shall we move on to some things? Now, some came in last week, so they may be outdated slightly, but I think they're still okay. How are you ensuring the safety of air passengers, crew and ground staff once you start to repatriate by air?
So in relation to airplanes, again, there will still be social distancing employed. We have to remember that all the aircraft didn't just shut down. Logan Air has still been running a service to the Isle of Man throughout the entire pandemic period. So airlines will still be applying social distancing policy. They will be looking at how they queue. Lots of the airline industry have already been set up for this because quite large portions of the airline industry, although in limited format, have continued to operate the whole way along. So they have their own processes and procedures as well.
And when people do arrive, will there be any heat guns? Will there be filling forms, checking they're going off to isolate?
Yeah, so people will still need, obviously, the exemptions from the Cabinet Office to be able to travel. It's not an opening of the borders. The borders remain closed, so the criteria for entering the island remains exactly the same, and they will need the appropriate exemptions from the Cabinet Office to be able to travel. Upon arrival, of course, they've got 14 days that they do have to undertake, and they will be served with a notice to that effect.
Will the police enforce the distancing rules and arrest people who break the 10-person limit to protest? I presume this is all going to the event happening on Tuesday, and the Chief Constable has weighed in on this one as well.
The Chief Constable has. I've seen the post. Now, the important thing to stress is, as a politician, we do not get involved in the day-to-day policing. The day-to-day operation is down to the police. I know the police have been engaging with the organisers of the protest in order to try and make it compliant with the law and to ensure the safety of those who attend. I think what I would echo is the words of my counterpart across the water, Matt Hancock, when he was asked about this yesterday. It is important that people have the right to protest, that people have the right to express their opinion. But at the current time, I would certainly ask people to consider whether they believe at this point it's right for them to go there and attend at this time, or whether they want to do something different, whether they want to protest over social media, whether they want to video themselves doing the protest and at home and actually then upload it. Obviously, as Health Minister, I would discourage at this time any form of gathering in that way, because although we've got 0 active cases at the moment on Ireland, there's nothing to say there isn't still low-level transmission within the community. We don't have that guarantee. So all I would say to people is if they are planning to attend, then they really need to consider whether they believe that's the right decision for them and their family.
And that's Black Lives Matter protest, but it now looks like it's going to be a protest about the protest, so who knows?
Well, let's hope we don't get into a situation where there's protests about protests.
Yeah.
Obviously, what has happened in the United States across the water there is horrendous. It is absolutely dreadful that situation ever occurred. I've seen the video footage of the incident, and there's no way that can be defended in any way, shape or form. So I fully understand why people want to make their views known on the issue. But like I say, at this current time, with the current situation going on around the world, I would just ask people to consider what they think is best for them.
Now onto sport, and we can now get people on the actual football pitch, can't we? But they can't get too close to each other. And this is what this gentleman's saying here. He says training is started, but it'd be great to have all 25 players on a pitch, like England are proposing, or maybe done by now. This would help both physical health and mental health, as I know a lot of players and clubs have missed the togetherness massively.
They have, and obviously that will be something that will be considered as a next stage. At the moment, we're not ready to go to that extent. We are still limiting at the moment the numbers, but like I say, there are things that will come forward over the next couple of weeks that may change that. But I've made clear all along that, sorry Paul, I'm going to use the phrase again about baby steps. I know you love me using that phrase so much.
You get a point.
But we
do in the corner, like in those quiz shows, you get a point.
Yeah. But we do have to do things in a staged manner,
right.
In all seriousness,
yeah.
And that includes sports as well. And I know it's frustrating because a lot of the football clubs, the rugby clubs, they're real families, and they when they're not meeting, they feel like they're torn apart from their family, and so we will get there, but it's just got to be done in a staged manner.
I think this next person just really making a statement. Will the Chief Minister and you in by the whole thing of Comyn and the administration show the same amount of urgency to the island's economy, distressed business, unemployed and job creation as they do to the lockdown from the island from the COVID-19 situation?
Yeah, well, I think the Treasury and the Department for Enterprise have been working exceptionally hard. I think the government did react quickly in terms of the economic situation. We recognised straight away, obviously with my hat on, everything you hear from me is around health, but the government as a whole very, very quickly and very early on recognised this was an economic problem too. Hence we brought in MIRA, hence we brought in the salary support schemes and the other schemes such as the tourism grant as well, and the general grant. So I think we did react very, very quickly. As was said at the start by both the Minister for Enterprise and the Treasury Minister, as time moved on, those schemes would need to adapt. We have been adapting those schemes and we will adapt again, but there is support out there in place and we will continue to support the economy to try and get it back to where it was. But we do need to recognise that, that's going to be a long haul. It's not going to be there's no magic short-term fix.
The next one's fairly long, so bear with me. Do we seriously have more detail on when the pubs could possibly be opening and when our children can get an education? Pardon me. My son has been at St Ninian's Hub as I work at Nobles, where he's been allocated a computer to complete work as passed on by Google Classroom. I've had a letter this morning saying he'll be moving back to lower school after TT as he's in year 7. And as I'm a key worker, this will be the same. He'll be allocated a computer to get on with it. It also states a 2-metre distancing kept from anyone at all time. At this rate, our nightlife will be fully open and we'll still not have a detailed phased return to school. We know the year groups are going back on the 22nd, and that is all. Can you help me shed some light on this, please? Priorities should be schools before pubs, surely.
Well, in relation to pubs, first of all, there isn't a guaranteed date yet on pubs. The Chief Minister has said in his statement that we are looking around ideas towards the end of this month, the start of July, but that obviously is not confirmed yet because there would have to be firm guidance in place, guidelines. How you do social distancing within a pub is very, very hard, and we recognise that, and that is why at the moment it's food-led, what we've announced, where social distancing can be maintained, where the food is the substantive element. In relation to schools, I understand the frustration, but it does need to be done in a carefully managed way, and that does mean bringing it back by age groups. I know the Department of Education has been looking at this in detail, and they've assessed which age groups they believe actually have had the most impact on them, and that's how they've based them coming back. For schools to be fully up and running, I would be perfectly frank and say I wouldn't expect that until the new school year starts in September.
Okay, that's going to be hard on a lot of people, I'm sure. This person has plenty of room in their garden to accommodate 30 guests complying with the new social distancing rules, but access to the garden is through the house. I'm allowed one person in my house or 2 from the same household. Am I allowed to bring the guests to the garden through the house, provided I let them in one at a time, and presumably they can also use the toilet?
So with the household thing, yes, if they are heading into the garden area, that is absolutely fine. That is also one of the reasons why the household rule was brought in, because we recognise that obviously facilities are required as well, should we say, when you've got people around. Obviously, there's never going to be, it's never going to be hard and fast, because with the gardens, you do have some people with very, very large gardens that could accommodate a lot of people. Equally, you have people with very small gardens. So that's why we've kept the limits where they are, because we've done it on the average of what people can manage with social distancing in place. The policies are constantly reviewed, so those numbers will change and the way we do things will change. But again, we've got to recognise it's about keeping people safe, but allowing them that interaction, because one of the things, that became very clear and we knew would happen through lockdown is people were isolated from their family and friends, from their support network, and we were keen to unlock that to a certain extent to allow people to access that support network, but in a safe way.
Why is the Isle of Man reluctant to update its rules on birth partners being allowed to accompany labouring women throughout the whole labour and into the ward post-birth to visit, when numerous UK trusts are allowing one allocated birth partner to be present throughout labour and allowing the visit post-birth, despite the UK having hundreds of deaths a day and the Isle of Man has no confirmed cases for over 2 weeks?
Right, well, the guidance we have in place for the maternity ward is in line with the Royal College of Nursing guidance that is applied in the UK. One of the things that is very important to emphasise is that a maternity ward in terms of COVID-19 poses a great risk. It's not the case that birthing partners are not allowed to be there. They are allowed to be there once labour commences. Then they are allowed to remain prior to the transfer to ward. Now, in practical terms, what that means is in most cases it can be up to 2 hours before a transfer back to the ward. So it is a substantial period of time. I realise this is frustrating, and my inbox has had a large amount of people wanting this to change. But again, I'm afraid it does come down to the fact that that it is a risk with the maternity ward, with the babies, pregnant women who are in the vulnerable category, and it is important that we follow strict advice. That advice, again, is always under constant review, but the advice we are using and the advice we are following is in line with the Royal College of Nursing current advice. But this person's indicating
that
maternity wards.
Yeah, this person's indicating that England's slightly different. Is that how I read that, though?
No, well, certainly they seem to be indicating that message that England is slightly different, but certainly the inquiries I've made of certain trusts, the advice is exactly the same as ours, and they are implying it exactly the same as ours. So I'm not sure why they seem to think there's a difference. It might be around the terminology used around Labour, but certainly the trusts I've had any contact with have been applying it exactly the same.
I mean, is there a rule for the whole of NHS England, or is it by NHS trustees? Is that what you're sort of saying there?
No. The advice is set by the Royal College, so the Royal College of Nursing, Gynecology as well. They have issued advice, and it is applied across NHS England, as far as I'm aware.
With the new sense of allowing the gyms to open soon, is it a week on Monday? Is that right still? It says here. Anyway, but not the wet rooms, which is my favourite part after a workout, due to supposed health concerns in regard water or sweat droplets. I don't actually know of anyone who doesn't sweat in a gym, not even Prince Andrew, to my knowledge, as I know it certainly that happens. So anyway, basically saying what they call the steam rooms aren't going to be opened up, but people do sweat anyway. So what's the difference here?
Well, actually, Paul, one of the things with gyms is gyms aren't just going to be able to open up and get on with it. One of the things we'll be setting around that is the guidelines as to what can be done in a gym. So it will be those processes that don't produce huge amounts of sweat. It'll be it's not gyms just reopening as was before, and you can pound away on a treadmill for an hour and a half, sweating to your heart's delight. It's not going to be that way. There's going to be strict guidelines about what can actually take place in a gym, precisely for the reasons outlined that the person spoke about, which is, COVID-19 can transfer via sweat and water droplets, and obviously steam rooms, saunas, everything like that is a huge risk.
What about showers, though? Don't showers, but I mean, by the very nature, producing droplets.
they will remain under the current advice. They will not be open.
Oh, right, no showers in the gym. Okay.
And under the current advice, sharing facilities will not be available.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That will affect me when I was thinking about going down. So look out for that one. But there'll be more detail on that, won't there? Because it was all a bit
there will. The
vague,
guidance is still, as the Chief Minister said at the press conference, the guidance is still being drawn up.
Right.
We like to trail these announcements about a week, 2 weeks in advance, because it is important that people either who are involved in the businesses or people who might use those businesses have advance notice. So just the same as we did with the hair, beauty, lifestyle industries, we trail it about 2 weeks in advance, and then the guidance follows closer to the time, so that people can see the detail.
And I don't know if you heard that question I put to you would have been there that day, I think, as well, about the hairdressers having to make all this information, write data down, and then the data inspector guy said he didn't know anything about this being happening, and you need to be registered to write down data. Did we get that sorted? I mean, like an app seems to be the obvious way eventually that people could just give details without having to pass on details to hairdressers or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't think you were on the Friday press conference.
No, I wasn't.
I don't think, Paul, because I actually answered it. So I'll give you the answer now, which is it is law. The law went through Tynwald, the regulation is there. It is a requirement for hairdressers and lifestyle treatment to actually keep the register, so it is GDPR compliant, because it is actually a legal requirement for them to do so, because in the event that we need to, then we can do contact tracing should anything occur.
Don't they have to register, though, for that and pay a fee?
So in terms of this, because they're complying with the law, my understanding is not.
Right.
Because it's emergency regulation.
Sure. Okay, just one more for me, really, to finish with. Coman didn't back the transparency clause, which Julie Edge was bringing forward for people standing in future elections. And I think it was a bit puzzling why you wouldn't want to see as much transparency as possible. And I'm talking about Coman block vote here.
Right, well, we do want to see transparency, and there were other clauses and things that went through in the House of Keys elections bill that we did back. We backed 100%. I actually spoke on that particular clause, and one of the concerns is, that it could put people off standing. When we are elected, we know that we need to declare all our interests. We need to have it's a public register of interests, so people can go, and it's online as well, so people can see what members' interests are, and that's important when you're an elected official. But if you're a candidate, or considering to be a candidate, we keep saying we want people of business experience, we want people with different backgrounds to stand. Now, there's some people who may well say, well, hang on, I'm going to have to declare every single thing I'm involved in, including things that if I'm elected as a member, I might give up, as an interest prior to standing. And if I'm not elected, it's there forevermore out there in the public domain. The public knows all my business, everything else, and I've never even been elected as an elected member. So I think in certain circumstances that will put people off. And I certainly know since the debate, having spoken to someone who was considering standing next year will not now stand as a result.
Okay, I get your point on things like being members of this or that, but if it was criminal past or activities, it wouldn't make any difference. In fact, it'd be easier to catch it earlier rather than to go through the process, maybe get elected and then having any problems like that. Or is that completely different sort of thing?
Well, that's completely different to what was being proposed, Paul. What was being proposed what's being proposed is actually they fill out a declaration form similar to what we do as elected members after we are elected, which declares all of our interests, everything we're involved in, even down to shareholdings we hold, any interests in property, etc. All of that being declared beforehand. And certainly, we keep saying we want to open it up and we want people with more experience in different walks of life to stand. Personally, I think that will actually put quite a few people off who will say, well, that'll be there forevermore. Everyone will know my business and I may not even be elected anyway. Why don't I just stay in the private sector and carry on as I am without people having that information about me?
Okay, well, we'll be hearing from Julie Edge, I think, about this on Monday. But thanks again for joining us. Have a lovely weekend. And if we have questions, we'll be here again, I guess, next week.
Good to see you as always, Paul.